The topic reads Inculcating Learning Skills. And let me start by sharing a story. And this story might relate to many of us because we could have gone through this in our life, either individually or even amongst the siblings or amongst the friends. So Gogol is the character. It's a 7-year-old character, a 7-year-old boy who's like any other 7-year-old boy, very bubbly, active, and full of energy. So, and parents take him to zoo, and he enjoys what happens in the zoo, but he takes his enjoyment to a different level. So, somewhere down, what happens in a 7-year-old, his mind starts lingering around, and he starts getting curious and trying to find out why zebra looks like this, why giraffe looks like this, why the stripes in the zebra are of this shape, and why in something else is like this, and so on. And those are things which keeps coming in his mind. And then suddenly he pops up one of these questions to his parents, who take him to the zoo, who assume that he will just enjoy the zoo and not trouble with these questions. Rightly so, when he puts these questions to his parents, so parents ask him, please don't ask stupid questions like this, naive because they don't know the answer, but insist that this is not the way you have to do. Just you have to concentrate on your studies. And Gogol also goes to school, and the environment is not very different. So he tries to understand by asking what is happening in the class. A similar type of response comes from the teacher as well. You just sit and listen to me and try to understand what it is. The very fact that something is glowing in his mind and he's trying to understand things better by spontaneously coming out with it is being curbed. Fast forward 15 years from now, so Gogol also becomes a doctor. He finishes his MBBS, and then to his luck, he also becomes an ophthalmology resident. He finds a place at LV Prasad Eye Institute. So he stands in the corner and he's in the lecture. You can see a founder chairman standing there. So he asked him the question, so why are you keeping quiet all the time? And this is what I found in the founder chair also. So what I heard from him was, whenever you see someone has written a book, right, or you see something which has been written in the article, we should have the ability to question. And it is then when we can move the status quo. And that's how the progress is made. This really enlightened him. For last 15 years, so this particular chap, Gogol, was always being sidelined or was not able to express his spontaneous ability of what he could do, curbed. So the skill what we are looking at here is curiosity. And the moral of this short story is, ever since childhood, most of the basic skills are never taught to us, but rather assumed. The parents do tell us that, no, why have you not got the first rank? Why are you not the second rank? Why are you not got third rank? All the parents want the children to be on the top, but it doesn't happen that way. And if that does happen, when the child comes back, and the only question they ask is, you're not able to concentrate, you're not able to read, you're not able to apply, but never ever they have been taught how they could do in this way so that the desired results could be obtained. Now, we at LV Prasad Eye Institute did understand and debate about this issue a little bit more than a year. And we committed in this last academic year that we would impart these 6 skills to our trainees. And one is the learning skill, second is observation, third is curiosity, fourth is critical thinking, the fifth and sixth are the presentation and leadership skills. So I'm going to give a brief understanding of the first 4. The 5 and 6 is not going to be the scope of this meeting. But nevertheless, each of these topics are an entire go on for 2 or 3 hours in a minimum, like what we do conventionally in workshop with our fellows and residents. And we do it every 6 weekly. We have finished imparting all the 6 skills to them. I'm just going to give a brief insight of what each of them mean. And let's start with the learning skills. So my presentation also would make us understand that how we could get to this learning, observation, curiosity skills, and how we could reduce from that. So if you understand learning and the type of learners we are predominantly, human race are predominantly 3 types of learners. So the visual learners, which nearly comprises about 61%, the kinesthetic or the hands-on, they like to repeatedly keep doing, and they form the another nearly about 40% or 30 to 40%. So the auditory learners are the most minuscule, about 10%. So if you see the predominant, they happen to be the visual and the hands-on learners. The auditory forms only the 10. So that makes me very curious. If you have to understand this, why is that if auditory learning is the smallest part of the type of learning which we really inculcate or impart? So why is that the didactic lectures have to be the most predominant form of student engagement in our curriculum? So I happened to stumble upon this book. So this is a very nice book by Michael Swigert. So a sage on the stage talk, which talks about what is being shown in the slide about common sense reflections on teaching and learning. If there's a need, if you got to read about it, it's something nice read. You will be able to understand things better. But the question which I had to put to you guys is, why do we have to still continue didactic lectures as a predominant form of student engagement in the learning processes? Is there a need to it? Having raised this question, I would also go on to the other form of learning, of peer learning, which my previous speaker also alluded to. And peer learning is a very effective form of learning. It's a type of active learning compared to the passive learning process of didactic lecture, what I just raised in my previous slide. And peer learning, apart from enhancing the learning, it also inculcates the social values and also interpersonal relationship. It's a wonderful way by which people can get together and do it. It is just we should have that mindset and confidence of giving them small problems at a time, and they can come out with wonderful solutions. That initial go is what is important, and once we cross that hurdle, then we see something fantastic coming out from them. Having spoken about peer learning, the next learning what I wanted to discuss is about creative learning. And there are three building blocks for creative learning. The fundamental block being the observation. The block in between is the curiosity. And the third one, or the topmost one, is the critical thinking. So all these three form a creative learning process. So it starts with observation and ends with critical thinking. And why this creative learning is important? So if you look into the evolutionary process, the way we have evolved ourselves, we can ask this question: are we inherently creative? Yes, we are. There's something within us and which has made us what we are today. What is that inherentness which we have? We have this creativity and curiosity, which is just like the many apps you can find on the current phones. All those phones have multiple apps, but even in our body, there are multiple apps, one representing creativity, another representing curiosity. That depends on how we use this app. For some people, it can just remain dormant, not used at all. But for some people, they use it in a fantastic way and they become very creative. And my attempt was, why not reignite our inherent skills, which are otherwise very dormant within us? And this is what I was thought about maybe a year and a half to two before. Let's do this. This is not something which we have to read somewhere and get it. It is all within us. We just have to find that small lock, small key which can open this big lock of curiosity and creativity within us. So having very briefly spoken about learning skills, I'll quickly jump to the observational skills. So observational skills are very important. Observational skills doesn't mean that we just see, it is much beyond seeing. And when you have to evolve or develop these observational skills, one behavioral shift is very important. And what is that behavioral shift we are talking about? And it becomes very obvious or evident when in medicine that we have our teachers telling us, your eyes will see what the mind knows. Just keep reading, and it is then when you will be able to pick up all those things, which from the patients, when the patient lies down, and all those important aspects you will be able to see only if you have the basic fundamental knowledge. Probably that's a good way to start. But if you want to have the real behavioral shift, it should also end somewhere. And the ending point is, I can see what mind does not know. And it is then when the observational skills have bloomed in the person to the fullest. So having said that, this is another very interesting article where people can understand more about it, where developing clinical observation skills by looking at art. And these are the names of the authors. You can go into the PubMed and you will be able to understand how these authors have influenced clinical observational skills using art in the museum. So what we do is there are many types of observations if you go in narrow and deep in observations itself. But I'm going to limit to two important aspects which would be relevant to medical education or even health education of being imparting observational skills in what is known as static and dynamic. It can sound as a very polished jargon, but static is just you just have to represent an image, and dynamic is a video. So the challenges are when you show a static image, we project a static image, they're able to pick up the observational skills much faster than when you show something which is dynamic. For a video, when you show, and that's the real time when the patient moves the eyes, or when it happens in the operating room setting, the way we evolve our observational skills at that point of time is something which is more paramount, or I would say more superior to even static skills. So the way we impart static and dynamic skills are on two folds. One is guided and non-guided. I will explain to you what the guided and non-guided means. So this is just flashing an image. There is no difference. There's a swelling in eyelid. Many times you would see something like this. To a person, say for a medical or medical graduate or even postgrad who enters this organization or system, say, why don't you describe this image, right? So when you ask this question, so the person looks at every corner of the angle and tries to pick up something which is important. So he picks up 3 or 4 points, but his eyes or mind is not open to pick up every small details which you can make up from this. So the making the observations on an image which is first shown is known as unguided observation. So this is good for people who have already started experiencing observational skills, or already started developing. But for a novice, what I would suggest is go with the guided observation skills. It is then when they can understand the length and breadth and the depth to which the observations can be made. So these are the guided. This can be even like a gamification tool. You can just mark them, and based on these, people can get started. Up to what details your mentor or teacher wants the observational skills to be enhanced, and this is how one can inculcate that getting into the minutest of the details is important in terms of enhancing the observational skills. Once the person gets familiar with this, they will certainly graduate to the unguided observational skills. Having spoken about learning skills and observational skills, let me take you to the next skill set. It's curiosity skills. Curiosity skills, as it all means, is just about asking questions. It is not about answers. So this is where one has to understand by natural instinct when we are in the clinic, when we have this curiosity skill workshop. So when we had to train a few of our doctors for this curiosity skill workshop, we had to do this active learning process for them, or teaching them that, please don't get into the answer of asking questions. But because once you get into the answer of asking questions, or you want to get into a diagnosis, you don't understand, the extent to which the mind can bloom in asking questions. So do not ask questions. So do not expect answers of the questions. Just allow them to ask questions at a random and free as much as possible. So here I would like to quote what Albert Einstein had said. So I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious. And that's what we all require to reignite curiosity in our students. Here also there is a behavioral shift which is required. And this behavioral shift, what is going to happen is it is going to give confidence. The confidence in the student is going to be enormous, because here the student is going to move from being a very good follower, saying yes to everything what he sees, reads, to graduating himself to asking questions why, how, what, and when, to everything what he observes. So this is very important. Some can have excellent observational skills, great ideas, but if someone does not have that confidence in them, the self-confidence coming deep within, they will not be able to go to the next step. And that's the major behavioral shift what can happen if we give that right environment to blossom the curiosity in our students' mind. Haven't spoken about it, and even briefly alluded to the the story of Gogol, where he was not able to express his curiosity. There are barriers to curiosity, and that's what limits us. And having spoken about barriers of curiosity, there are, there are two types. You have the extrinsic and the intrinsic barriers. And extrinsic is the one which is very important, because the environment has to be conducive. Like, you should have a non-judgmental environment, and there's a lot more to it to make it so resourceful for the people to understand that they can speak their mind irrespective of what comes to their thought process. So various places which can act as a barrier in extrinsic environment: the parents themselves, the school. Then the third is the workplace, in terms of when criticism is offered in the type of work which is being done, or it could be a fear of looking down. And intrinsic are three, where being one blind follower like a bat, and fear of unknown, and lack of insight. This is the lack of insight, I would say, is pretty dangerous, because these are the people who don't have the knowledge base within themselves, but extraordinary amount of confidence that they can do something without having that knowledge. So that also is but that's predominantly an intrinsic barrier. So let us focus on more on extrinsic barriers. And what I mentioned is about the parents. The parents have to generate the time to spend with the children, allow the children to ask questions, should not refuse any questions with the child asks. And if they are not able to answer the question, probably they should say that I'm not able to answer your question, let's go and learn. And that should be the process what we should adopt, especially when a child is growing up. And the school, the major changes needs to be in school, because the school in predominantly most of the world has recalled learning, right? And in India, which is popularly called, you mug and write in the exams, you will get what you are supposed to do. The recall type of learning and the bias children. So if you have a non-recall bias type of environment, I know it is very hard. It is not so simple. But if the curriculum itself turns towards a non-recall type of school educational system, or whichever educational system which one is involved here, that would be even superlative. And third is fear of looking down. So that's a self-judgment or even judgment by the others. And this is a very common cause. Oh, I open my mouth to think, what would happen if I'm wrong? You don't have to worry about it. If you have done the little bit of homework what is required, you can speak. It also happens. Learn from mistakes and move forward. It is far better than keeping mouth shut and not knowing others what wonderful questions you have within yourself. And last but not the least, criticism at workplace. This is so important. So criticisms have been offered, especially when you have a sort of a positive criticism is something which is very important. Providing feedback from a mentor to the mentee, or from an higher up to a person who's low down in the cadre in the organization, has always been useful to the person in terms of mentoring. But this has to be done in a more polished and a better way. It cannot be ridiculed. People should not feel that once you go ahead with to boss someone, they should criticize at work. So what happens again? The curiosity starts ebbing down. So having spoken about the and mentioned that it's all about thinking, it is not about, and also mentioning that shift, which is to get that confidence in people, and the barriers of curiosity, which is predominantly external, which is maybe at home, school, or at workplace. I'll move on to the next skill, which is the thinking skill. So having spoken about the thinking skill, let me take you back to the history. And here, there are two different narratives. I was going to talk about the Western narrative and then the Indian narrative. Socrates from Greece has also always been considered as father of critical thinking, because if you understand this, and that's what is important, and that's what he strongly believed in, and the type of questioning what he started is still being popular, known as Socratic questioning. That's the reason why you find some of the softwares also in this Socrates. What is Socratic questioning is when someone asks you a question, you don't stop there. So it is about then you go back to the person and you ask why. Why did you think so? And when he says that, again you don't stop. But why? And that's how you keep on promoting this. But why you thought about it? So here there are two important aspects which one have to learn. Number one is the question, and second, I think is the most important aspect. What was the thought process behind asking that question? Once you are able to understand the thought process behind asking that question, and that's where you take your student to a very different level. First time, there might be hurdles and challenges because these are all something which we have not grown up with, we have not adapted it. But once you get this into the process, maybe a couple of workshops we do, they are such fantastic, and we cannot understand, and it will be, I think, it's a horizon, or even is what is the limit to what you can take when people start thinking in this particular direction. Let me share the Indian narrative. Again, this historical perspective. We all know about Chanakya from the 4th century BC. Something phenomenal. And he wrote the 18th Ardhashastra. He didn't write the first Ardhashastra, so he wrote his 18th Ardhashastra. And we all know that he is a kingmaker, how he made Chandragupta Maurya as the king and overthrow the Nalanda dynasty. So in his Ardhashastra, there is a subject known as Anvikshiki. And what he talks in Anvikshiki is so important. And this is what it means. There is no English equivalent of Anvikshiki. Anvikshiki, if you break it down, it's called Anu and Ikshiki. Anu means atom, that's a small part. And Ikshiki means a person wants to know. So a person wants to know every small part of it. And that's what it, to a certain extent, it can equate with an English language of what Anvikshiki is. And what he really mentioned in his Arthashastra was before providing the knowledge of the subject, please teach them the art of thinking. If you teach the art of thinking and then give them the knowledge, the advantages are many folds. And 2,500 years before, right, you will not believe, he promoted 6 types of thinking: both sides thinking, alternative thinking, leadership thinking, creative thinking, lateral thinking, and spiritual thinking. Amazing amount of history we have in our own country. And we don't have to go anywhere west for us to understand what thought process is all about and how thinking has to be done. We could all get from our own ancient civilization. Moving forward 2,500 years now. So what we adopt in our workshops is this. We don't exactly adopt what is there in the different types of thinking, what Chanakya has mentioned, but we do adopt the 7 types of thinking process in our workshops. So they are the concrete thinking, abstract thinking, analytical thinking, divergent thinking, convergent, creative, and critical thinking. The first time you hear, it might sound it's enormous, but let me explain. It's very simple to remember. Concrete thinking is the simplest form of thinking, or is the first building block. And this is anything which perceived or appeals through you to your 5 senses of smell, sight, sound, taste, and touch. And that is concrete thinking. So to give an example, if this is a photograph of a patient with disc edema, right, with a swollen disc, a concrete thinking with a visual impulse just makes that this disc is edematous and nothing more beyond it. So this is a very simple form of thinking, and that is concrete thinking. The next level is known as abstract thinking. And here, this thinking is centered around something which is tangible and intangible, based on previous experiences. The commonest example one would be able to see, there are many examples in medicine, especially the most famous which we read is this liver abscess looks like anchovy sauce, right? So anybody in medicine, they would read, we have to just by heart what anchovy sauce. We will not understand what anchovy sauce is because we have never been taught what anchovy sauce is, nor we had the curiosity to understand what anchovy is. Anchovy is nothing. In South Indians, you will really know that, it's a small sea fish called nethili. And that is what anchovy sauce is. So, but since we have to get anchovy sauce and remember it and by heart and vomit it in the examination. So similar to this, you have the central retinal vein occlusion, the abstract thinking based on the tangible or intangible experience, it looks like a tomato splash. Some of them would look like cigar hemorrhages. Microbial keratitis of non-tubercular type will look like cracked windshield appearance. So these are the experience one can relate to when you look at a phenomenon or a clinical picture. It will take you directly into the previous experience. Or this looks like a donut. This looks like medoda. This looks like idli, whatever you might want to call it. The second is analytical thinking. Analytical thinking is you get an information. The moment you get the information, you break it down. The visual information, what we get to see, or auditory information, you break it down and then you process it. The example is what I can give it to you. On the left, you can see on fundus photograph, and the information what we can get from this is this patient has an hyperemic edematous disc. There are hard exudates. There are soft exudates surrounding the disc. There are flame-shaped hemorrhages. There are attenuation of the arterioles. This is the various information we can get from if you look at this fundus picture. And if you incorporate all this, if you in the peripapillary area, if you see in an edematous disc, if you see hard exudate, soft exudate with an attenuation of arteriole, the mind would automatically take us to accelerated hypertension. And that is analytical thinking at its best. So divergent thinking is another types of thinking. Let me recap. The concrete thinking, the simplest and basic form of thinking, which primarily appeals based on the five senses. The abstract thinking depends upon the tangible and intangible experience, what they got in their life previously. And then the third is analytical thinking, where you get an visual impulse, you break it down, and then you analyze things the way they are. The fourth is divergent thinking, is when you have a problem with you, then you try to give a different solution to the problem. For a clinician, this would mean that differential diagnosis. There could be different possibilities to this particular, different solutions to this particular problem. So again, going back to disc edema, if you have to have the divergent thinking, it could be either pseudodisc edema, or this could be because of ischemia, or it could be due to the inflammation in the retina, or it could be due to an optic neuritis itself. So this is divergent thinking. Then convergent thinking is putting together different information in a logical and then sequential organized manner. So, and coming to a sort of a diagnosis, coming to a sort of a conclusion. So here there's extreme amount of logic has to be involved. And the information which you have to, in a regular clinical setting, let me put it this way, we get the information from the history, from the science, right? And from the investigations before you come to a diagnosis. So we have to crystallize or distill the important information from the history, from the observations, from the investigations, and then come to a diagnosis. To give an example, if a patient who's diabetic complains of sudden decrease in vision, and his visual acuity is around 660, and very poor low contrast visual acuity, color vision is not very defective. There is relative afferent pupillary defect, and there's a pallid disc edema. And on investigation, if you see patient has an altitudinal field defect, the working diagnosis would automatically go towards ischemic optic neuropathy. So this is what we call as convergent thinking, where we break up or individual information, crystallize or distill the important information in each aspects, and proceed forward to make a diagnosis.
Sir, we have another 1 minute to complete this.
And the last is creative thinking, where people use different types of concepts, new concepts, to come to a diagnosis. So, or where you can use past observation, past learning, and make something which is very different. And critical thinking is, the highest of the order of thinking, where we have to step aside our personal beliefs, presumptions, and prejudice, and then make an opinion based on our cognitive skills. So here, before I like to sum up with the different types of skills, this particular slide would like to recap what we have just spoken at length. So it does not matter what we teach, but it does matter how we teach them to think. And we all know that there is a boomerang effect in every behavioral shift or attitude we learn. We earn via learning. And what do we get when we enhance the observational skills? we inculcate attention to the details. When we inculcate attention to details in a training, the next step moving forward is going to aim for perfection. When he's going to aim for perfection, the next step is he'll be going on lines towards excellence. When someone adopts attention to detail, perfection, and excellence, it's a sure shot that he's going to be successful. And that's the positive boomerang effect you will see, even with something like enhancing the observation. Second is, if you nurture curiosity, I also mentioned that it would develop the self-belief and confidence. So this is very important, that you might have a fantastic dream, but if you don't have the confidence, you're not going to get there. And last but not the least, like what I said, promote thinking. And what we need, if we promote thinking, the youngsters who we are involved in training are going to be very creative problem solvers. We want creative problem solvers because we have problems coming up all the time. We want problems to be solved at our lab, at our offices, at our clinics, at our at our institutions, at our organizations, at our network in the state, at country level. When we have this enough amount of creative problem solvers who are there at different levels, it will generate, or it will create a revolution in true selves, where we would be able to solve, have very creative solutions to all the major problems which will come in the future. And this is our team which works together at LV Prasad Eye Institute to think about all this. And this is, I would say, the think tank of ophthalmic educators group. Thank you for your kind listening.